Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Trinka, and I'm ready to start the webinar on understanding vision problems after brain injury. And so this is a really simple topic. The eye is connected to a lot, and neuro-optometry can help. Okay, webinar over. Any questions? No, I'm kidding. This is an immense topic. There are so many books written on this subject. And so let's try and get through some of it, and I'll try and make it as easy to understand as possible. I'm Dr. Trinka, and this is a webinar that I'm doing for Integrated Brain Centers, and a little bit about me and my background. I'm a neuro-optometrist. I've been doing that for about a decade. I'm a certified nutritionist, been doing that for about 2 decades. Same thing with syntonic optometrists. And I've been practicing optometry, neuro-optometry, and nutrition for about 30 years. Maybe someday I'll get it right and I'll quit practicing. That's a joke. No, it's like that everybody comes in with a different set of circumstances, and so you're always learning. I think that's why they call it practice. For people who don't know what syntonic optometrist is, that is a eye doctor who looks at different frequencies of colored light that has powerful effects on the brain, and in particular, the autonomic nervous system, which is the nervous system that's divided into fight or flight and rest and digest. And especially in these times, fight or flight is pretty dominant, and it can cause a lot of negative things in people. So it's nice to balance people's nervous system with frequencies of light. Very non-invasive, very easy, and extremely powerful. So those are the things that I do. And I enjoy and am passionate about all of them. So let's get into the webinar. So I think people don't realize this, that the pathways from your eye to your brain touch almost every aspect of brain function. And I've got this, I was going to say needlessly complex slide on the next slide, but I guess it's not needless because it just is complex. And so here it is. And well, okay, what happened to it? Hold on just a second while I get it. There it is. Yay. So if you start in the upper left-hand corner where the sun is shining light onto the eye, and then you can follow some of the pathways through the brain. And yes, Claudia, definitely we can. You have to just contact my office, and I'll be happy to give you a copy of this. No big deal. Super complicated, but also really cool. And essentially, this is saying that the messages from the eye go through a lot of pathways, and they all go. If you just go from the eye and go directly to the right, there's a nucleus called the lateral geniculate nucleus, and pretty much everything flows from here. Although there are certain retinal cells that hook up directly with the hypothalamus. And if you know anything about brain function, you know that the hypothalamus is the master control center for all hormones. And so you can influence hormone levels with light. And I found that to be fantastic when I first heard about that. And there's a lot of levels here. So this is complicated. Let me point out a couple other things on this. And I have a blown up one right here that I'm gonna kind of look at while I talk to you guys about it. So the eye is involved with detecting things, obviously visually, but it's also involved in emotions through the hypothalamus. It's also involved in heat regulation, circulation and breathing, sleep, growth and maturation, and reproduction. Also has to do with eye movements and language and the pineal gland, which is kind of the body's light meter. And so in the body's light meter, it affects reproductive functions, growth, body temperature, blood pressure, tumor growth, brain neurotransmitter metabolism, immune system, and it modifies the actions of all of the endocrine glands. An endocrine gland is one that produces hormones like adrenals or pancreas or thyroid or your thymus gland. And so all of these glands can be affected by light. If you go back to the left there, where it says eye, and there's circles that are filled in and circles that are not filled in, and those have to do with different cells in the retina, and they're called M cells and P cells. I mean, obviously there's a lot of cells in the retina. We're just talking about a couple of them. And the M stands for magnocellular, and the P stands for parvocellular. That's the fancy language for saying, hey, they do different things. And M cells are involved with detection of motion and speed and high contrast. And they kind of tell you where you're at in space and where things are in relation to you. And P cells are much more involved with color and detail and lower contrast and kind of a slow pathway. It looks like the connection that I have here is a little funky because I keep on seeing the video of me go kind of blank out. So I apologize for that. But sometimes the reception in the mountains is not the best. So this is all this is supposed to tell you is that the eye is connected to a lot. And I just wanted to emphasize it. And I can show you in another slide pretty much the same thing. The eye is connected to a lot. And so there's all kinds of real estate in the brain that the eye feeds into and feeds forward back into the retina to go ahead and cause changes in how you ambulate or move, among other things. And so when you have a brain injury, the possibility of you affecting something in your vision is very real and high probability. So let's move on to the next slide. So one of the differences that I see all the time is the difference in visual pathways between central and peripheral. And I just want to expand on this just a little bit. Regular eye doctor, so I'm driving to a point here. And my big point is, if you have a brain injury, not necessarily any eye doctor will help you. And the reason why is because standard eye doctors generally look at central eyesight. And what do I mean by that? Well, they're going to have you look at a chart and read some letters that are black letters on a white screen that are super high contrast in a semi-dark room while you're sitting still, and that doesn't reflect your life very much. It's important. I mean, central eyesight's important, and you need to see somewhat clearly to get through life, because if it's all blurry, you can't make out the details of what you're trying to do. So I get that, and that's important. However, they're only evaluating the central part of your eyesight. And in the central part of your eyesight, it takes up a very small portion of your for visual attention. And the type of optometrist that you need to see to go ahead and evaluate the structures that are most commonly altered in a brain injury are not central eyesight. The central eyesight, unless you have a direct hit to the optic nerve, are not going to be that affected. And so you can have a brain injury and think something's wrong with my eyesight, something's wrong with my vision. And so you go to an eye doctor and they'll, do the famous what's better, one or two, and they'll come up with an answer that make you see the chart clearly, but it doesn't address all of the problems caused by the damage to the real estate that is connections between the peripheral retina and your brain, and from your brain to your peripheral retina. So this is why I spend so much time talking to people about the differences between visual and central pathways, because the visual pathways that are central are not usually super important in a brain injury, unless of course there's a direct hit. But most of the time, it's all peripheral. And eye doctors in the main, 80%, don't even look at the peripheral retina. And if they do, it's only to detect pathology, to say you have a blank spot in your vision. So it's a structure thing, not a function thing. So hopefully I got my point across that peripheral is important. So central visual acuity, like I was saying, is great. It's important. You can read addresses in dim light with the proper correction. You can see details far away and color. And it is the quote unquote, what is it pathway. And so when you're trying to find out what something is, you're using your central retina that comes from the real estate inside your retina called the macula. And inside the macula, there's a tiny little kind of scooped out portion that is called the fovea. And the fovea is hooked up to central sharpness and acuity. And that's what we work on when we do traditional refractions in an eye exam. However, the important guy, in my opinion, is peripheral visual pathway. And this has to do with where am I at in space, and where are things in relationship to me. It's an extremely fast pathway, and it detects motion and speed. And this is what is usually affected when a person takes a hit on the head in whatever form. So this is one of my favorite slides, because really what it tells you is kind of what I'm saying all along. And that is that most of the surrounding space that you take in through your eyes is not where your conscious attention is. And this is powerful. This space kind of tells you where you are at, where you're going, and it sends messages to the front part of your brain, so that you can make executive decisions on what you're seeing. And I remember reading a kind of an account of an artificial intelligence professor who got into a minor fender bender in Chicago, and he hit his head. And for him, it destroyed his life for 8 years until he found a neuro-optometrist that could help him coordinate his central and his peripheral vision. And he was an extremely articulate man. And he had this whole narrative about going to Home Depot, and he was remodeling his house while he was right as we got into this car accident. And he said, I couldn't make any sense of what was going on unless it was right in front of me and I could focus on it in my central eyesight. And he said, what would normally take 10 minutes to go get a screw for his project, it took him an hour and a half, because all he could pay attention to was the central part of his eyesight. Now, this is extreme, I get that, but it outlines the problem when your peripheral eyesight and your peripheral vision isn't working and coordinating with your central. So this is one of my favorite slides, and it just says, hey, there's a lot more going on than what you think when you do an eye exam, number one, and when you get a brain injury, number two, because it's this subconscious awareness and conscious awareness that is the peripheral eyesight that is affected, which helps you very much navigate the world and beyond. So let's take a look. And this is what I just said. This is it's the connections in the periphery that are going to be more susceptible or more vulnerable to damage, both in signals that go from the retina to the brain and from the brain to the retina. Most of it is about a concept called mismatching. And what is expected is not matched up with what reality is. And so you get all of these symptoms. And so, what are some of the symptoms? Well, in the main, I mean, this is a short list. Obviously, there's many more things, but these are the ones that I run into on a frequent basis. Um, I've I've seen people take a little hit on the head and they're dizzy for weeks, and the reason why is because your your peripheral retina hooks up into one of it's called the eighth cranial nerve, and the eighth cranial nerve is the vestibular nerve, and the vestibular nerve has to do with your inner ear and your cerebellum and your vision. And so if that communication gets knocked out of whack, then what you think is forward or side or up or down isn't quite matched up to what the reality is. And so that mismatch causes dizziness. There's a part in your brain that there's a part of your brain that has to do with light sensitivity, and the light sensitivity is a part of the midbrain, in a very tiny place called the superior colliculus. And so connections from there, and this is really common. And sometimes the answer is sunglasses. Oftentimes it is, but many times it's trying to hook up different parts of your brain so that they talk to each other better. And this is really important. One of the most common things that I see after a brain injury is that reading problems surface. And so a person will read for, normally they're avid readers, voracious readers, and they read for 15 minutes and they're exhausted. And I see this a lot, and this has to do with some of the other things I'm going to talk about in this webinar. And that is eye movements of a certain type. And so we'll get into that in just a little bit. And that's exactly the next thing. You see eye movements being strange, and like when I do recording of eye movements, I oftentimes think to myself, what is this person looking at? Because it's nowhere near what I'm seeing on a screen that's recording with their eye movements. So, and this is super important to, this actually leads into dizziness and reading problems. Motion sensitivity is a huge issue. Some of my toughest cases in recovery from brain injuries have had to do with motion sensitivity. And there's some awesome tools that I learned as I went along that can very much help a person with visual motion sensitivity. This is the person that says, going to the grocery store after a brain injury is a nightmare. There's just so much going on. I can't handle it. It's like stimulus overload, which is what you just referred to, Kathleen. Yeah, it's just too much, because there are nerves in the brain that connect to your eye muscles, and if you can damage those nerves or the nuclei that fire those nerves, you can have eye muscles that don't work. and when they don't work, you can get double vision. And so nothing can be more disconcerting um, than having double vision. And there are certainly glasses that can help, oh my goodness, for motion sensitivity. This is one of the things that I found is most powerful in neuro-optometry, is that you can, in fact, one of the um, one of the most important things that I can do for visual motion sensitivity, and there are many, um, is to occlude different parts of the retina from getting stimulation. So just as much as I want to stimulate parts of the retina to improve brain function, I also sometimes do the opposite. I want to stop stimulation from the retina so that it quiets down the nervous system. Because the vision system is highly tied into gait and posture and balance, when a person gets hit on the head, they can have any of these issues. And so these are the symptoms that I run into the most frequently. Not an exhaustive list for sure, but see them a lot. Let's move on. So, as I alluded to before, one of the more important pathways in a brain injury is the ones that concerns eye movements. And so there are extraocular muscles um, that control um, your eye movements. And these extraocular muscles receive stimulation, and they make your eyes go back and forth and up and down and in a torsional motion, and in a circle. And so, but it's far greater than that. These extraocular muscles are receiving nerve impulses from deep in your brain, in the brainstem and in the midbrain. And these are very common areas that can get disturbed with a hit on the head. And so let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of eye movements. Um, so the ones that are most common are fixations, pursuits, and saccades. And so what are these things? So a fixation is your ability to hold your eyes on a single target and just keep it there. Um, a an inability to hold your eyes stably on a target is crucial, because you can't make sense of the world if your eyes are jiggling. And so that's what a fixation is. You're just looking at an object and it's forming a stable image on your retina. A pursuit is the ability to track something. And so if you just take your finger and you move it from right to left and left to right, and you follow it with your eyes, that is called a pursuit. People often refer to that as just tracking. A saccade is a jump. And so if I hold one finger and I look at one and then I jump to the other without moving my head, then that's called a saccade. And I find most often that these three are altered when a person gets a hit on the head. Optokinetic is a type of eye movement, and this is a reflex that is initiated as an infant, and basically this stabilizes the image of a moving object on your retina. Similar to if you were driving and you stopped at a railroad crossing and there was a train, and the optokinetic reflex is your ability to follow the train in one direction and then shoot back to where you started. So there's a slow and a fast movement. There's a slow with the direction of the movement of the target, and then a kick back, a jump back. So it involves both saccades and pursuits. It's a critical reflex to keep a stable image on your eye when you have moving visual input. Vestibulo-ocular reflex, which is commonly called a VOR, that keeps a stable image on your head or stable image on your retina when your head moves. And so if you look at your finger and turn your head and go like that, that's the vestibular ocular reflex. And finally, in avergence, avergence is the ability to turn your eyes in or to turn your eyes out or to turn your eyes up and down or down and up. And vergence movement weakness is usually what causes double vision. You cannot move your eyes in or out, up or down. And so because of that, the image splits into two. What I see really frequently is vergence movements that have been altered but don't cause double vision. But the effort that the person puts out to make one image on one eye and the other image on the other eye coordinate into a single image is so much work that it's exhausting. A very common um, occurrence is when a person reads, because when a person reads, they have to turn their eyes in. They have to, quote unquote, converge. And when they can do that easily, generally reading's pretty easy. There are obviously other things involved in reading than convergence, but it's one of the single most important things to look at when I hear difficulties with reading as a result of a brain injury. And so I often see that people aren't actually seeing double when they look up close and read on their phone or in a book, old school, or on a computer. But the effort that they're using to try to make it single is exhausting. So these are the type of eye movements that I see most frequently. Well, these are all the type of eye movements. The ones I see most frequently are fixations, pursuits, and saccades. So, um, I also think that reading a computer, being on a computer, has its own challenges. I mean, you have blue light, you have a flickering screen, you have pixels. But the good news is, in terms of convergence, your computer screen is usually further away. And so you don't have as much convergent effort. So it's kind of a mixed bag. There's light sensitivity issues. There's there's blue light issues. There's a lit screen issue. But in terms of convergence, the demand is less because usually people read at about 16 to 18 inches, and their computers are usually 22 to 24. So probably less convergent stress, but that's not the whole game. So it's hard to say that computer is more of a challenge than reading. It could be not. Um, so I got this slide from a really good eye doctor in the middle of Iowa. And she let me borrow the slide because I thought it was good. I thought it said some things that I could expand on or give better understanding about. So we talked about saccades, and there's reflexive and voluntary. I didn't say that before, but now I am. So if something appears in your side vision, sometimes you don't even care to want to look at it, but you just do. So that's a reflexive saccade. And it originates in a different place in the brain than a voluntary saccade, and contralateral means opposite. Um, and so ipsilateral means the same side, and contralateral means the opposite side. And so you get different places. The point of the slide is to say there's different places that do things for different eye movements. Um, and this talks about a slow pursuit or tracking a moving object that comes from two different lobes in your brain. The VOR, vestibular ocular reflex, like I was saying before, this keeps your eyes fixated on something while you turn your head. And then you have vergence movements, which um, can keep both eyes on an object, whether near or far, when your eyes tend to move either the same direction or the opposite direction. So a little more on the 6 movements, just to kind of give you a feel for it. And I don't want to beat it to death, but you're either going to hold an image, and this is just a different feel for it. You're either going to direct, the first thing to do is to direct the sensitive part of your eye where you get central eyesight to the image that you're going to look at. And then what are you going to do to keep it stable in there so you can make sense of it? Well, saccades, pursuits, and vergences hold the image. They direct the image, They direct the image, the fovea to the image, the central part of your eye where you see centrally and clearly. And then holding the image steady is a fixation, a VOR, or an OKN, optokinetic system. So there's just, the point is there's different systems and different parts of the brain that control eye movements. And if you don't have proper eye movements, you don't live the life that you want to live. And it's something that we completely take for granted, unless you do have a hit on the head or through some level of maldevelopment, you turn out to be a horrible reader or have issues with interpreting visual stimuli, or you're uncoordinated, or things like that. And so easy to take for granted until you have a problem, like a lot of things. So, and I really think that your eye movements, as been pointed out to me, impact people's life in a dramatic fashion. It's just that when they don't work is when you start to look at it. So let's take a look at the next slide. I like a machine that I got. I've known about the machine for about 3 or 4 years, but I went ahead and spent the money and got the machine in the late part of last year. And this is called a right eye. And the right eye is it's a machine where you look at a computer screen and there's a target on the computer screen, and the target has you do several things. So it has you follow a thing in a circle, has you follow something a target back and forth, up and down, and then jump from one side to the next side, and then same thing, up and down the same way. So when these infrared sensors watch your eye while you're doing these eye movements, it can easily detect issues. So it generally looks at these 3 fixations, which is the ability to keep your eye steady, a pursuit, which is tracking a moving object, and a saccade, which is a jump. And so let's take a look at a couple of slides about right eyes that I pulled from my patient files in the last 3 months. So this was a young lady who was playing college rugby. Lacrosse, sorry. Yeah, no, lacrosse. I mean, yikes. A little different. But she got hit on the head a couple of times. And what this shows is that so obviously you want your IQ score to be somewhere in the functional range, if not better. Elite athletes are way, way up here, because the reason that athletes are elite is because they have exceptional vision. They can be strong, they can be tall, they can be quick, they can have good eye-hand reflexes. Oh, wait, what's eye-hand reflex? Eye, hand. Yes, it's vision. So you don't see really good athletes that don't have good vision. You just don't see them because they can't manage it. So exceptional means usually elite athletes. So this person has an IQ score of 19. And the interesting thing is that when I put a pen in front of a person like this, and I looked at it, I can only see very slight deficits. But when I put her on the right eye, I mean, look at this. This is terrible. Her pursuit score, her ability to track, and this would relate to lacrosse, like how are you going to track the ball into your net? into your little stick. How are you going to track other players on the field? Her ability, 15, puts her in the percentile of 9%. You think this might affect her athletic ability? Just a little, right? Her saccades, her ability to jump from one place to another, a little better at 21, but still pretty suboptimal. And her fixations are the best. So let's take a look a little deeper underneath. So when I look at the circular tracking, she's supposed to have overlapping lines right along the dotted lines. I mean, this is one of those cases where I look at it and I go, is she seeing what I'm seeing? Because her eyes aren't moving anywhere like what is she supposed to. And this is just because she got a hit on the head. And so that's one of the things that I looked at first. And I thought, we need to stabilize the parts of your brain that are involved with this. And so when we looked at horizontal speed and tracking, this is her moving her eyes back and forth a number of times. And you can tell on the right eye, she doesn't even hit the target, and she's above the target in the right eye. And the left eye is a little bit better. Still a little bit high, but better. And then when you look at her fixations, her right eye is a little off to the left, and it's steady. So it says eccentric, relatively stable. What that means is that it's off kilter, but she can hold it. It's just not pointed at the right direction. And so and then when we look at the top, these are the parts of the brain that are affected that cause these things, which is super helpful for me because I go, okay, this is the cerebellum at the bottom of the brain, and this is the parietal lobe at the top back of the brain. And so if I look at these things and I see this, I go, okay, so this is where I'm going to start directing my therapy. I'm going to try and work on activities that improve the firing of the cerebellum and the parietal lobe. Let's take a look at another one. Okay, so this is a patient who is her late 50s and has had several concussions in her life, but was never treated for any of them. I was doing a normal, regular eye exam, and I saw I was just moving a pen, back and forth, saying, her name was Deborah, and I said, Deborah, follow my pen. And I looked at her eyes, and I was like, she does not know where my pen is. So I asked her if she would like to do this test, and she said, sure, I wanna know more. And this is one of the worst right eyes I've ever seen, and you can tell. Look at her IQ; it's 7. She's in the 8th percentile in pursuits, the 8th percentile in saccades, and the 0 percentile in fixations. She cannot hold her eyes on an object, and she's going through life and not. She's got complaints, and she's not having the best life she can live because of her eyes and because of her brain. Because the eyes are part of the brain, right? Can you really make a distinction? Maybe a little, but I mean, I always consider eye tissue to be brain tissue. And so let's take a look beneath. So you're looking at her ability to move her eyes in a circle. It's a disaster. I was like, how do you make sense of your world? You look at her ability to move back and forth, and she's got these crazy intrusions that have nothing to do with moving the target back and forth, especially on her right eye with these crazy intrusions, but her left eye doesn't even come close to the target. Um, and when you look at her fixations, she's pretty central in her right eye. Her left eye is not even on the page. It's not even on the screen. And so that's why she got a 0 score. And so she's been gone out of the country for a while. So I'm anxious to help her when she gets back. So this is just a way that you can view eye movements as a part of the symptoms that a person has as a result of a brain injury. And so what kind of help do you do? It's, what's one of the most interesting things is there's a combination of nutrition, because brain responds well to nutrition. Um, and yet you can't have just that. Um, One of the really interesting things is you can use eye movements to diagnose, but you can use eye movements to help treat, because using your eyes in a certain way can activate certain parts of your brain. So, for instance, if I take my eyes and I go from the upper right down into the lower left, and I just track that, I'm stimulating my left cerebellum, which is the base of the brain right down here. So you can use eye movements as well as to diagnose, as well as for therapy. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things to do, but I just thought it was important to point out that you can do both. Let's go on to the next slide. So another common disturbance is an egocentric shift. And this is a fancy way of saying your midline is altered. And so your midline can be, no, you should know where your midline is. If somebody says, I'm going to bring something from the left to the right, and I'm going to stop it when it's in your midline, or I want you to tell me when it's in your midline, you should be able to do that. So many times with brain injuries, I see people that have no idea where their midline is, and it really affects their balance and their clumsiness. So let's look a little deeper at this. So if your brain's working well, this is basically what should happen. You should have a bubble around you that should be equidistant, of course, except for your feet, because your feet have to be on the ground. But your bubble should be all around you and equidistant from your body. Well, when you get hit on the head, what happens is your bubble gets distorted. And I got this slide from another one of my colleagues who practices in Arizona, Dr. Thomas. And I think it's a wonderful slide because it kind of tells you that if you have a hit on your brain, for instance, to the right, then your left bubble is going to expand. If you get hit on your lower brain, which we consider to be temporal lobe, it's going to cause a shift up. If you get hit on your top brain, it's going to cause a shift down. So why does this matter? Well, if you perceive the world shifted down from where it really is, you're going to miss things when you reach for them. You're going to bump into things when you walk by them. And so you're going to be clumsy. You're going to be uncoordinated. And it's because your sense of midline is off kilter. Hopefully that makes sense to you. And so this is, your spatial accuracy is off. You have clumsy and balance problems, just kind of what I just said. So how can I help with midline problems? Well, first of all, you have to assess it. You have to go with a target back and forth, up and down, and find out where that person's perception of midline is. But you can re-educate a person's brain as to where their midline is by using two really neuro-optometric tools, which standard optometrists do not use. They just don't use these kinds of tools to help people with brain injuries because they're not concentrating on these things. They're concentrating on central eyesight. So one of the big points I want to get across to you is that if you've had a brain injury, don't go seek a regular eye exam for help with these kinds of things. If you think your central eyesight needs sharpening, sure. If you want to make sure that you don't have glaucoma, sure. If you want to make sure you don't have macular degeneration or a blood vessel problem in your retina, sure, because most optometrists are very competent at picking that up. But most primary care optometrists are not very competent in doing what I'm talking about here. And that is using unequal powered lenses to create a space shift, or prisms. Prisms, so a prism is like a triangle, and at the base of the triangle is where your retina gets stimulated. And this is a type of lens that doesn't focus light, it moves light. And so you can stimulate the part of the retina where the base is, but it projects space to the apex of the triangle. So if I put two prisms in on the left eye and out on the right eye, I will shift light to the left. Well, if I got hit on the left side in my brain and my space is distorted out here and my midline is altered to my right, I can use prisms to re-educate my brain as to where the midline is. And it's like magic. All of a sudden, the person's not clumsy. They can catch a ball. They can walk without drifting. They don't bump into things. Their hand coordination improves. It's a really kind of a cool neuro-optometric intervention. So I have a couple conclusions here. One of them's on the page, and concentrating on the visual pathways after a brain injury can be really powerful in helping a person heal their brain. And I love the statement. It's never too late to investigate. And yes, you to follow up on the prism. Yes, you do wear the prism. It's ground into the glasses. You never even know that it's there unless the doctor orders it. It doesn't make the glasses look any different. It doesn't make them, but it sure makes them feel different. You have an incredible sense of where you're at in space that you didn't have before. It truly is a powerful tool that most people don't even know about. And it's because optometrists, neuro-optometrists, are such a small subdivision of regular optometrists, and where I'm part of the group that's just trying to get the word out. There's one more point I want to make before I wrap this up, and that is, when people talk about brain injuries, they think of motor vehicle accidents or sports injuries or something like that. And there's a concept called central integrative state, which is a fancy way of saying, how vulnerable are you neurologically and metabolically to a hit on the head? I've seen major things happen to a person's balance, memory, language, eye movements, because they hit their head getting out of a car. That seems trivial, but it's not, because their central integrative state was so close to being vulnerable to a minor hit that it caused all these symptoms. So it doesn't have to be a big thing. And that's why I say at the bottom here, it's never too late to investigate. So I hope you enjoyed this little brief dive into the visual pathway and how it can be influenced by neuro-optometric intervention, and what kind of things can happen to the vision system as a result of you getting a hit on the head. So we do free consultations both through integrative brain centers and eye-brain connection. And I love trying to educate people on what neuro-optometry and functional neurology can do for people who have had a hit on the head, because it can be so powerful. I would probably make another point is, you don't have to have a hit on the head to have neuro-optometry and functional neurology help you, but that was the topic of today's webinar. So I kind of want to stick with that. And then these are my resources for today's talk. All great places to get information. And then, as I say to so many people, if you change your vision, you can change your brain, and it can change your life. And so I was asked to go back one slide, and so I will. And these are the resources that I have. And then here's the contact. I'll keep it up just a little bit longer. So if you're looking at this and you want to write it down, you can write down the websites and you can write down the phone numbers. I really appreciate anybody who's on this for listening, and I hope you all have a good night. Appreciate you listening to me. Thanks. Have a good night.